Hey, I'm Hamish and this is Writing on Games. If E3 is the game industry's Christmas, then it was hard not to go into this year's conferences thinking that your presents had already been opened for you. From around the time a Walmart Canada listing revealed the existence of Rage 2 and Bethesda was forced to start their marketing campaign early, it felt like every day leading up to E3 brought along yet another batch of leaked games, oftentimes feeling less like a slip of the tongue from a wayward retailer and more like publishers trying to fit their games into their own spots pre-show, so as to avoid getting lost in the whirlwind of trailers and reveals, securing what little time they could get in the spotlight. An understandable impulse for sure, but it meant that the joy of speculation usually associated with the big reveals of the show was largely gone. We knew that Cyberpunk would make an appearance, we knew about Fallout 76 and Rage 2, we knew the big 4 games Sony would be showing off, we knew there wouldn't be any info on the new consoles until at least next year. We basically knew it all, meaning that publishers instead needed to focus on how their games were being presented as much as what they were presenting in order to keep people's attention. And in that sense, the most prominent through line of the conferences as a whole could be summed up in Andrew WK's performance at Bethesda's show. An earnest attempt by music's most prominent party man to bring a more playful energy to this marketing event, frequently cutting from an audience ranging from indifferent to outright confused. That is to say, what you could call the disconnect between publisher expectations and audience reception. It was a trend that continued throughout their presentation for the most part, with the let's have fun sentiment conveyed by WK being mirrored by the countless devs proudly paraded like rock stars and comedians. And look, I am always in support of publishers championing the oft-overlooked developers behind our favourite games. It's one of the reasons I'm usually so enthused about E3, it feels like a celebration. The problem being that, in this case, unlike WK, these people don't have the years of practice in terms of timing and dealing with potentially unresponsive audiences. It led to a lot of truly chest-tensioning moments where devs would be making jokes or proclamations that just weren't landing, awkwardly trying to eke out some kind of meagre response out of the sea of silence before them. It was rough and just had me wishing they'd cut to a game, any game, but they were there too, you couldn't escape it. The point is not to take developers off stage, but rather have them focus on what they do best, talk earnestly about their games, keeping it short and to the point, maybe having a more experienced presenter guiding them through it. Developers aren't performers, and that's okay. It's something Bethesda would do well to learn for next year. But this mismatch of publisher expectation and audience reception was far from exclusive to Bethesda's conference. Sony's showings in general since the release of the PS4 and their newfound confidence when placed alongside the Xbox One have only become grander with bigger venues and an increase in production values around the games they show. This year, however, as the conference faded in, things looked a lot more cozy. Think overpacked garden party as opposed to night at the ball. As the trailer for The Last of Us 2 opened up, however, you realised that they were mimicking that game's homely church environment, a potentially neat touch. But the problem of this approach turned out to be logistical, as I'm guessing it made more sense in someone's head than it did in practice. We've gone as big as we can in terms of venue, so how about we splash out on more venues? Well, a lack of consistency, given that they only did this once, meant that we were left with a real awkward intermission slammed right at the start of the show, as a bunch of presumably disgruntled journalists were marched from one set of movie-watching seats to another. In turn, this was a conference we came here looking for Death Stranding footage from, and we ended up watching trailers for Call of Duty and Destiny 2 of all games. Sony's daft opulence has always been easy to dismiss as humorous posturing in previous years. This is the first time it actually dragged the energy out of what should have been a showcase of some of the industry's most polished titles. And despite how impressive Microsoft's presentation ended up being this year, their insistence on showing 50 new games in a bid to convince people that any games were indeed coming was inevitably going to lull somewhat in the middle, narrowly avoiding feeling like something of an assembly line purely down to the quality of the games going along it. Perhaps focusing on the best games, your Sekiros, Cyberpunks and the like, as opposed to all the games would have done some good here. And even Smash Bros. Fans had to admit that Nintendo dedicating almost their entire direct to Smash Bros. Going into the changes of every single Smash Brother was maybe just a little bit too much Smash Brothers, and maybe should have been saved for the following Treehouse stream. And look, that's not to say that there weren't exciting games to be seen during all of this, especially considering they opened with a goddamn mech game, which is a very easy way to get me hooked immediately. Death Stranding finally saw Kojima break the cycle of cryptic trailers and vague concepts with actual gameplay, and much to my personal excitement, it ended up clarifying very little. All I know is that, given my affection for difficult to categorize games, if Death Stranding plays out as some kind of survival horror meets hiking simulator, then it sounds exactly like something I'd be into. Hitman 2 looks like it will at least partially address one of my criticisms of its prequel, that it would set up these potentially disruptive set pieces, then would have them function as little more than static set dressing. Here, it at least looks like you might have more direct control over the larger events occurring in missions, while also heightening the absurdity that made 2016's game such a joyous experience. Cyberpunk's structuring of its trailer feeling almost identical to GTA 5's reveal, combined with its aesthetic, its first-person perspective, and its developer's affinity for classic RPGs, had me envisioning some kind of Deus Ex System Shock type deal taking place in an open world with Rockstar levels of detail. A feeling mirrored by many individuals who got to see the behind closed doors demo in person, making it easily the game I came away from the conferences most excited about. Now, with all of that said, and I understand I'm almost certainly in the minority here, but while Devolver's conference last year may have fit with their wacky anti-establishment bent, after 2 years of it, I can't really say I'm into the shtick. For me, the show felt like little more than a very well-acted wink and nudge aimed at the industry targets du jour. How about them loot boxes, am I right, gamers? At least my friend Pedro looked neat. Maybe it's just me being overly cynical, but it's hard for me to view a company as truly anti-establishment when they're basically in the same business as everyone else here. It's not a cynicism I'm proud of in any way, but it's one that I just couldn't shake during the entirety of E3. Microsoft's conference was one of their best in years, and Phil Spencer actually seems like a good dude, but his constant talk of the art form and taking the art form forward rang a little hollow when considered alongside the fact that it's, well, Microsoft saying it. Same with EA and their wheeling out of the indie devs as if to say, look, we really do interact with human beings, sandwiched by one of their most generic lineups in quite some time. Same with Bethesda telling us that Doom was made by the catering staff or something. Okay, that's cool I guess, but you're also massive companies trying to sell me something here. I love E3, it's a week where we get to genuinely celebrate the people and the good behind the industry, but I'd be lying if I said there's not a part of me that wants us all to drop this charade for these companies to just recognise that it's all just marketing and get directly to beaming whatever they're hawking into my dumb head. It says a lot then that the conference that ended up seeing me drop some of that cynicism ended up being the PC gaming show of all things, where despite their perhaps well-earned reputation as a direct marketing device rather than an actual show, this year saw a platform given to some neat looking games that I genuinely never have heard of otherwise. Things went wrong, it was a comparatively scrappy production, but both Day 9 and Frankie's consummate professionalism in dealing with it all was a joy to witness. They were able to talk to these understandably nervous developers on their level about the daft nerdy shit they excel at, making them more relatable to us as an audience, rather than just shoving them on stage by themselves and leaving them to sweat. It surprisingly acted as a barometer of where industry and audience trends are at, with people audibly groaning and leaving as Day 9 wearily joked about yet another 1v100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 game being shown, highlighting just how real Battle Royale fatigue is, even in the just year since PUBG's release. It even left me genuinely surprised with the casual slip that we're finally getting Yakuza games on Steam, holy shit! In a weird way, it was kind of everything I wanted from an E3 press conference that I ended up getting very little from in the presentations of other publishers. And maybe that is the biggest surprise in itself. In short, our Christmas presents may have been opened early, but they turned out to be the friends we made along the way or something. See you next year, E3! So I hope you enjoyed my piece on E3. As always, these videos are made possible by your unbelievably generous support over on Patreon. So if you want to help the show, maybe consider donating. Every pledge helps more than you can possibly know. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Nico Blakely, Rob, Michael Wolf, Artyom Vitsyuk, Spike Jones, The Nameless Guy, Chris Wright, Dr. Motorcycle, Harry Fuertes, Ham Migas, Travis Bennett, Zach Casserly, Samuel Pickens, Tom Nash, Shardfire, Philip Lange, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Brandon Robinson, Justin's Holderness, Biggie Smith, Peter, Christian Kuhneman, Camel Traffic, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, I've been Hamish, and this has been Writing on Games. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.